Okay, hello everyone. Thank you for joining me and Joel in this session about the quality harmonization journey at Johnson & Johnson. My name is Morgan Palmer, and I'm joined today by Joel O'Connor, who's the IT Director and Product Line Owner at Johnson & Johnson. What I hope you'll get from today's session is an understanding of the operational and business benefits of harmonizing your quality management and safety management processes, the journey that you would take in order to achieve that harmonization, some expert insights from Joel on how to approach your harmonization project. And throughout the presentation, you'll hear about some differences between standardization, which means everyone's doing the same thing, not necessarily a good thing, and harmonization, which means everyone's taking a consistent approach, which is definitely a good thing. And also a whole bunch of best practices and lessons learned that you can apply to any industry. I'd like to give you a few words about ETQ. We offer a market-leading portfolio of applications for automating quality management, safety management processes. We have about 40 applications that sit on a common platform that is widely recognized to be the world's most flexible, scalable, and easy-to-use platform, all delivered in a SaaS environment, so on the cloud, using cloud-native technologies for the purpose of quality management. We've been developing and offering and implementing our solution for 30 years. We have deep expertise that cuts across many different verticals, serving over 700,000 global users today. And allowing our customers to adapt their quality management, safety management processes to make them just right for them. I think that's one of the things you'll learn from this harmonization journey, is that it's about creating processes that are just right for you. And that's fully supported by our superior customer experience through our support services and customer success organizations. Here are a sample of some of our customers across some of the key verticals that we serve. And you'll notice they include some worldwide global organizations, as well as more mid-market companies. And we deal with customers with varying degrees of complexity based on their needs. All right, let's go back to the topic at hand. Harmonization, what is it? So we have a natural tendency in business, in quality, in safety, and everything, to trend towards chaos, to trend towards increasing complexity. And harmonization is a way to defend against that natural tendency. In organizations, there tend to be pockets of differences that arise because of various organizational events. Could be different products, could be different locations, could be mergers and acquisitions. And the harmonization process is a way to bring all that complexity towards a more simple solution in order to serve the broader organization. So that's one very important aspect of harmonization. The other one is it drives a consistent approach. And I've already mentioned this. That doesn't mean an identical approach. A consistent approach means that you're providing users with a general direction for how the process should work. You're supporting the user's work. You're not controlling the users necessarily. You're not forcing them to follow the exact same step or fill in the exact same fields. And as we'll see, a good harmonization journey should include exceptions. That doesn't mean that everyone has an exception, but being able to accommodate exceptions is very important. And then just by the nature of harmonizing the process, you should be also harmonizing the data. In today's digital economy, the value of data is ever more increasing. It's critical to have good, consistent, harmonized data in order to drive decisions and improve processes over time. So having harmonized data can give you that single version of the truth that's so important for future improvement. Why harmonize? So one of the key drivers, or one of the key benefits, let's say, of harmonization is it's going to improve your overall efficiency. It sort of makes sense that by reducing complexity, you get more efficiency instead of dealing with dozens or hundreds of different variations of processes. You're dealing with one consistent process or one set of consistent processes with just a few exceptions. That allows you to do a couple of things. First, it allows you to improve that process more efficiently, because when you're making changes to a more limited set of steps or more limited set of processes. You're not having to touch a whole bunch of different processes in different areas of the business. And it also improves your ability to react to change. Change is a constant, right? Your business changes all the time. Quality systems need to keep up with that change. And if you can focus on a core set of harmonized processes, you can be much more agile in implementing that change. Another key benefit of harmonization is it allows you to pool, to consolidate, centralize, if you will, all the change management activities. Change management activities related to rolling out your processes, to making the changes to your processes. And that includes things like training, documentation, support, in order to drive that increased adoption. As you know, we tell our customers all the time, and they know quality is everyone's responsibility. That means every user needs to be engaged with the quality management system. So making sure that you have the necessary change management in place is important, and having harmonized processes make that so much easier, so much more cost effective. And then the ability to have this harmonized data, this single version of the truth, allows you to drive a couple of really key areas in quality. One is the ability to drive better data for risk management. As you all know, quality and safety management standards are trending towards making more use of risk assessment and risk management in a more global from a more global perspective. And risk is a very data intensive process. It requires a lot of data. And obviously that data needs to be consistent, needs to be harmonized in order for it to be useful. So having good, consistent data coming from harmonized processes is an important precondition to moving your quality systems, your quality processes towards a more risk-based approach. The other thing that good data can do is it can help you support decision-making more efficiently. Good data represented in good ways, whether that's in business intelligence dashboards or alerts, or maybe even machine learning recommendations, that type of use of data can generate better decisions, faster decisions from the individual users. At this point, we're not talking about replacing the users. They still need to make the decisions, but the data can support their decisions and they can make better decisions, which is critical to increasing cycle times, reducing errors, and so forth. Ultimately, the ultimate goal is for data to actually support autonomous decision making. The manufacturing world is already moving towards autonomous manufacturing. That's a really important theme these days with Industry 4.0. And in a sense, quality needs to keep up, or should actually accelerate their implementations, their processes, in order to keep up with what manufacturing is doing. We don't want quality or safety to be a brake on the business operations. They need to align and operate at the same pace as those operations. So all that to say, having good data, critically important. Now, before I hand it over to Joel, let me step you through the harmonization journey. And much like implementing any piece of software, not just a quality management system, much of the work happens outside of the software. So first of all, you need to really understand, what is your current status? What are all the different processes the organization is using? So where are the exceptions? Why are there exceptions? I'll just use a common example, which is the corrective action process. So it sits at the heart of quality and safety management, or some organizations consider it to be the CAPA process, corrective action and preventive action. And that's a very well-known process. There are different variants, like the 8D or the DMAIC, and other short form type processes. And we often go into an organization and we see that these Kappa processes are implemented very differently in different parts of the organization. And although the individual stakeholders truly believe that their Kappa process needs to be different, when you actually dig under the covers, the differences are often pretty minor, or let's call them the necessary differences are pretty minor. So these are good candidates for harmonization. But first we have to identify where those differences are and what's driving those differences. Now, when it comes to changing a process, that's always going to be a sensitive issue. Everyone wants their own process, and especially if they've been using it for a while, they have obviously a lot invested in it. So change is difficult. People don't like change. Change is necessary. One way to make that change easier is to focus first, before we get to the process level, on the business outcomes. What are we trying to achieve as a business? And we get those business outcomes and we translate those into goals, quality goals or safety goals or operational goals. Let's agree on the goals, sort of high level requirements, why we're making the change before we talk about what the change is going to be or how we're going to make those changes. So develop the goals first, including the business outcome, and then we can refer back to those to make sure that we're meeting those goals. And those typically will get broad agreement across the organization. An important thing about a goal is it should be measurable. So in concert with defining the goals, we should define KPIs and metrics to measure those goals, to make sure that we're actually achieving those goals. It's always a good idea to start looking at your reports and metrics up front. In a sense, it's like starting with the end in mind. Often reporting is an afterthought when implementing a process. It's true for quality management, just like it is for many processes, but it shouldn't be, because you don't want to end up with a process that you've implemented that's not generating the data you need for the reports. So start with the end in mind, which is what should the reports look like? What do you want to track? What are your KPIs? Then you can make sure the processes support those metrics. Okay, now we're ready to touch the processes. We're not yet in the software. We're going to do this on paper, whiteboard, electronically, whatever you want to use. And we're now going to take a look at our outcomes, take a look at our goals, and we're going to create these best practice processes that will become the foundation for the Harmonize process. Now, maybe you've already got a best practice process. Maybe it's in one location or used in a couple locations or a region or a facility, and you can leverage that. Maybe you want to start a pilot to evaluate a best practice because you don't have one. What is important, though, is you arrive at a best practice. You shouldn't have different processes or processes that are very differently implemented across the organization, because it begs the question, why is this part of the organization using something different from this one? Which one is the best practice? So arriving at a best practice also acknowledges that you, in your organization, have a best practice that will be followed through the harmonization process. And that doesn't mean it's going to be the same as some other organizations. It's about creating the best practice for you based on your operations, your products, your markets. Now we're ready to actually touch the software, and we're going to take those best practices and we're going to implement them. This is where a really flexible quality management system helps, because you can do all these changes using configurations. And the most important part is that, and I'll repeat it again, harmonization does not mean standardization. You have to have processes that accept exceptions. And as you're going through the harmonization process, you're going to identify exceptions that are worthy, that need to be implemented in the solution. That doesn't mean that you'll accept every exception. You'll be actually fighting very hard to push back on exceptions. And a good rule of thumb is that 80% of your process, 80% of your fields, your forms, your reports are going to be the same. 20% would be exceptions, which might be driven by certain local regulatory requirements or certain market needs, product needs, and so forth. Now, when it comes to implementing these changes, we want to fully leverage the quality management system to make sure that we have all the processes in a single harmonized system. Very difficult to implement harmonized process if you don't have a harmonized system. So this is where an enterprise quality management system that can handle all of your processes really comes in handy. If you have point solutions managing some processes, those will naturally trend towards becoming very different and not harmonized. Once you've got that defined in the software, you want to deploy that solution. That's where change management comes in. So this is where you bring in your training of your users, your documentation. Some of our customers choose to brand the experience. So it's not an ETQ solution anymore. It's their own solution. They're really promoting the value of this harmonized process, and they're basically getting buy-in and ownership of those harmonized processes. At this point, we're in the check phase of our plan, do, check, act PDCA cycle. So we're using the metrics that we designed into the process to measure how effective we are. And that will drive future changes. That will drive adaptation. There's always going to be iterative adapting of the processes as you learn more. And you can use the tools in the quality management system to drive that change. Corrective action process, change management process, for example. And then finally, this is an iterative process. As you're improving your processes, again, this is where the value of harmonization really pays off. You don't have to touch a whole bunch of different systems or processes. You're dealing with a common harmonized set of processes. So you can make those changes once, impact the entire organization, and you can really accelerate this flywheel of improvement and adaptation. And again, use the tools in the quality management software to drive that change. We have customers that have actually created entire change management workflows in the quality management software to drive the changes that they're making to the quality management processes. So it's not just about managing quality issues on products or operations. It's also about improving the quality management experience. With that, I'd like to hand it over to Joel to share with us how that journey looks at Johnson & Johnson.
Thank you, Morgan. Appreciate that. So my name is Joel O'Connor. I've got about 24 years in industry. I spent about 17 years of those 24 at Johnson & Johnson. As you can see, based on my history, long tenure working with quality specifically. I met ETQ back in 1999 at a small manufacturing company. And I moved to J&J in 2002 to implement a former version of their software called Flexible Workflow Engine, specifically for the DePuy franchise within Johnson & Johnson. I currently reside in Colorado with my wife and my fur kids. And as you can see, I really enjoy some outdoor activities like running and rock climbing and video games when I have time. Next slide. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Johnson & Johnson as a whole. We're broken into three segments. We have our consumer segment, we have our medical device segment, and then our Janssen or pharmaceutical segment. Now, today, I'll be speaking specifically about our medical device instance of ETQ called ETQ Instinct. But we have several instances at Johnson & Johnson, both for the consumer and medical device side, as well as another instance for our vision care side. We are looking to consolidate those instances into ETQ's next generation platform, NXG, in the coming years, and is a major goal for us from a quality perspective. But in subsequent slides, I'll be speaking specifically to our ETQ Instinct instance for medical device, which is our largest instance. Next slide. Journey. So this is the journey for ETQ Instinct. We really kind of kicked it off in the 2010 period. As Morgan was noting in his opening remarks around, the CAPA process specifically, there was a point in time in my early career in the early 2000s where every site had its own CAPA process and its own CAPA system. Now, we used ETQ's software to build kind of a model of what we felt the singular CAPA process should be. But the differences at the time and kind of where Johnson & Johnson was at that time, didn't predicate itself to moving to one single instance. And so we would make copies of that instance and bring it to a site and then change it based on their specific needs. That continued to proliferate. And so we ended up having, I forget, it was like 12 or 13 different Kappa modules at one point. And so as you can imagine, collecting all of that data and trying to report on that from a metric standpoint was very, very painful. And so discussions began in the late 2000s on consolidating to a single platform for medical device. And so in 2010, that was really our first launch of our ETQ Instinct platform, with receiving inspection, Kappa, and non-conformance within that time period. We would launch audit in 2011 and then also focus on our complaint management system in 2011. And around 2012, Johnson & Johnson acquired Synthes and merged DePuy and Synthes together. And so our first initiative there was to really focus on a complaint module, bringing Synthes into our existing complaint module, but then also expanding it to be able to accommodate the different products that Synthes managed from a complaint handling standpoint. In 2015, we went through a major revamp of our non-conformance module. Up to that point, we were, I would say, every franchise was using non-conformance slightly differently. So this was our attempt to bring all of medical device under one umbrella and really focus on one single non-conformance module for all of medical device. So to the point that Morgan made about harmonization, allowing for 80% of MD to use it a certain way, a specific way, and then 20% customized or configured for the specific either franchise needs or operating company needs, depending on the products that they supported, the business process, local regulations, et cetera. And then we began a major upgrade for Reliance during that same year. And in 2020, looking forward, we had some big releases with standards management. This was actually our first, I guess I should have noted this earlier, but this was our first attempt at going truly out of box with ETQ standards management solution. All of the solutions you see on the left are completely configured. We usually take the shell of what ETQ provides and build everything from scratch from the ground up, which has been great for our business for the flexibility. But as you can imagine, from an upgrade standpoint, it becomes very complex. We tend to highly configure and really kind of use every single ounce of power that ETQ gives us out of box, as well as even beyond with some Java customizations, et cetera. So this was our attempt at starting to look to the future, and I'll talk about this in subsequent slides, but look to the future with SaaS-based models, leading more into out of box. At the same time, we invested almost $10 million in our vision complaint system, which was completely configured per our past experiences, major release for the vision care business, and then also upgrading, preparing us to move to 2017 and ultimately 2020, which we're underway right now to move to NXG. Next slide. So ETQ Instinct is an on-premise solution for ETQ Reliance in medical device. It supports our medical device instance, or our medical device business, I should say. It's been in place since around 2008. That's about that tipping point where we started to look towards consolidating all of the ETQ work that was being done across medical device into a single common platform. Currently, we're on version 2017C.14 with a project fully underway to move to ETQ 2020 and then ultimately to NXG in the next few years. We have 12,000 registered users. And concurrently, we run about 400 to 450 at peak times during the day. So usually our overlap between East Coast and European hours is when we see the highest number of concurrent users. And we have about 41 interfaces, both inbound and outbound, feeding data into ETQ and then pushing data out to various ERP systems, reporting systems, downstream systems, et cetera. For configured modules, as you can see, we've got a non-conformance module that makes up product non-conformance, non-product NCs, calibration NCs. We've got complaint management on there for vision care, which is just massive, includes call center as well. So it's not just the management of product complaints, but it's also the call center up front. We've got corrective and preventive action. And then our audit module contains external, internal, and supplier all combined. And then we have a receiving inspection module custom built for DePuy Synthes. Next slide. Okay, so just talking about the ETQ Instinct platform, the size, the scale of it, you saw the timeline. it's been a journey. It's been a long, very successful long journey for us that has reaped many benefits for medical device as a whole and continues to be our North Star from a quality management system. Now, obviously, in a journey that long, there's always ups and downs. And so I'm going to talk in the next few slides about some best practices, some ideas, or some, just things that we've learned over the years that we continue to look back upon as we start new projects and new harmonization efforts to help maybe improve that process, move faster, and help the business along the way. I've been doing this for a very long time, and I will say it has never gotten easier. As Morgan said, there's a lot of pushback, there's a lot of challenge, and it just never seems to be easy to bring multiple businesses together to align on a harmonized process. So really make sure that you have the right people at the table. I think that's the first, kind of bullet that I would want to talk to is, sometimes you end up with business leads that maybe sit a little too high above, or maybe sit, in the trenches, so to speak, and maybe don't get the full picture of what is trying to be achieved from this process. And so ensuring that you have the right business leads that are engaging their specific areas, as well as bringing other business leaders in and out of those conversations, is extremely critical to the success of any kind of harmonization effort. Now, I sit in JJT today. My background was in quality. I moved to IT, I should say, just a few years ago. So unique perspective, I guess, sitting in JJT today and watching the business go through conversations that I used to lead, right? And so having good partnership, both from a business perspective, but also from an IT perspective, is really critical, obviously, to a harmonization effort. But the business is really the ones making the decisions. And so ensuring you have the right people representing their areas, engaging everyone else, is critical. At the same time, you're never going to get consensus all the time. And so you really want to be sure with the next two bullets, right, that you have a steerco that's actively engaged, that you're meeting with frequently, that really sees their role as roadblock removers, right, as helpers, not to measure your status in red, green, and yellow, and talk about funding all the time, and kind of nitpick certain things. It's the steerco is really there to help drive decisions, and for me to resolve disputes, because we're going to run into those. It's going to happen. And so you want to make sure the steerco is in place. They're there to support and to help, and that you have a governance structure that is aligned to the vision and the roadmap that this group is trying to achieve. So I'll talk a little bit more about that in a subsequent slide around that aligned vision, because we're taking different approaches at Johnson & Johnson as we start to move into this next decade around how we use harmonization to cleave more towards out of box versus the heavy configuration that we've always done in the past. Coming from IT, I think one of the most important things for me, specifically, not for the business per se, but for me, is stable funding. Now, at Johnson & Johnson, my funding from a technology standpoint comes from the business. And so they're investing their budget dollars in IT to build a solution for them. And so in the past, it was always come and go. It was, we need a project to build an NC module, and we would do that for 2 years. Funding would end, and then we would go back to steady state. And if there were changes that need to be made or updates to the process, we would have to start that process all over again of trying to secure funding, following a capital appropriation request process that can take months to achieve. In this day and age, we're trying to move as fast as we possibly can and deliver as much value as we can to the business. And so having stable funding provided every single year ensures there's no disruption to the team, and they can continue to churn out value for the business. It's taken us quite a few years to get to this point, but it's extremely important from an IT standpoint to always have the same players working on the team together. They grow, they bond, they become a family, and their productivity goes through the roof. As we talk to the business around what we're trying to achieve, we are starting to move away from leaning initiatives where you get incremental improvements to a process to starting from scratch. Now, we've kind of gone to Gartner and had this conversation, and they've really legitimized this, that leaning efforts have their place, but when you are looking to really make a dent or make an improvement in your process, it is best to rip it up and start from scratch. it has the best benefit. I think Morgan alluded to this earlier, just around the sense that everyone loves their process. Everyone's, no one's ever going to say their baby's ugly. And so if they have a hand in building that process, they're going to try to hold on to it. And so ripping it up and starting from scratch kind of separates everyone from the emotion of it and says, if we had a perfect world, how would we design it today? And it gives them that ability to do that. And then a new process that we put in place over the last year, we call it REAP, which is Requirements Evaluation of Assumptions Process. I know it's a mouthful. I just like the word REAP personally. But what this does is basically a decision tree for us that we put in front of the business that challenges every requirement or configuration change they put in front of us. Over the years, it was always conversation-based, very emotional. Hey, I need this because, I want this because, and value wasn't ever really discussed. So the REAP process for us is a value mechanism to say, if it's going to cost me 5 developers 6 weeks of effort to build this feature, what value am I going to get from that? How much value? I need you to quantify that. And it takes the emotion out of the conversation and allows the business to see, okay, sometimes it's always compliance driven. I get that. And we have to follow suit. And we have a process for that in the REAP process. But additionally, funding and value needs to be a part of that conversation. And that gives us that ability to do that. Okay, harmonization on paper is not always enough. I've seen many times in the early stages of a project, we harmonize on paper, but when it comes to the design, that's when everything starts to break down. Because the devil's in the details. It's easy to talk high level, hey, I need this box, we perform an investigation, but how do you perform the investigation? What steps do you particularly take inside of that investigation box? And then how do you do it? And then how do you do it? And what you get is, maybe if you're lucky, 80% aligned, but there's always that 20% that gets you hung up. So ensure your steer co is engaged. They're aware of the development progress that you're making, but issues that you're coming into that you can't resolve, bring those to steer co and get their input. Someone has to make the final decision on how you move forward. And that goes to the next bullet. You need decision-making power. Without it, you're stuck in the mud. You will spin in circles for weeks on end. I mean, even in my career, I've gotten feedback where I'm not making decisions fast enough. And there's a time and a place, right, for allowing the business to churn through those conversations to come to a collective decision that they can stand behind. And then there's other times where it's, I'm making the decision, we need to move forward, this is taking too long, we have to move on. And, as long as you have stable funding in the future, you're going to have future releases that you can course correct or make changes to, adjust for decisions that were made at a point in time. So just make sure that you have the decision-making power and people are empowered to make those decisions and not feel repercussions for doing so. Agile, it's everywhere, right? Every software project is talking about it. We're moving from waterfall to agile and are on a year 3 of a multi-year journey to get to full agile. GXP is very difficult with agile, mainly because of testing and validation. You can do as much development as you want from an agile perspective, but there comes a point in time where it hits waterfall and you have to do the validation and documentation once all the development is done. It's also dangerous to timelines because the business feels they're empowered to make last minute changes or change their mind on features and capabilities, which is fully allowed in agile. One of the tenets is we want change, but the problem is there's always a triple constraint of either time, resources, or money, right? So something has to give, and so I always recommend 2 to 3 sprints at the end of any kind of large development effort to allow for time for testing, validation, and even cleanup. So one of the things that we're doing now is we've obviously been having demos for years at the end of every sprint iteration, but we're now showing demos end to end, and then we're opening up the full system of the business for what we call business simulation testing. So they go in and they start to play with the system at a very early stage, understanding, it's going to have issues, it's not fully developed, et cetera. But what that does is it gets our users in there and they're giving feedback constantly. With Agile, we'll have an iteration right up until we start testing. And what we found is that we'll get feedback right up until that last iteration, and then we're out of development time and we can no longer make changes based on feedback, which may be critical. So always allow 2 to 3 sprints at the end of your development effort prior to starting testing to clean up all the business simulation testing feedback, any feedback you're getting from the business, so that you can incorporate it right before you package it up for testing and validation. In the early stages, use wireframe tools where available. So maybe it's just Word. I've done that in the past, where I've got columns and rows and I just kind of set up what the fields are, the field type, whether it's required or not, any business rules or logic around, should it appear here, should it hide here, and show this to your customers early on so that you get buy-in for the developers ultimately of how it's going to look and how it's going to flow. And this is really important, something I learned in the Vision Care project for complaints around call centers. We had never worked with call centers before. It was always very much quality-driven applications, let's say. And so the call centers had very different needs than anything I'd ever seen before. And so giving them wireframes, giving them pictorials up front, got them comfortable with the solution of where we were headed, and also allowed them to give feedback early on around what would work versus what wouldn't, and accelerated our development. So use wireframes and tools like that as an ability to show what the solution may look like and garner feedback early on. Now, recommendations for others, some more considerations. This is new for us at Johnson & Johnson. I believe we understand that out-of-box provides the greatest value and benefits for SaaS and cloud solutions. This is really tough for me to say because we've been a highly configured environment for so long, but I think the future really is avoiding highly configured apps, because by moving to SaaS, what you're doing is you're not having to upgrade anymore. You're not having to go through lengthy processes of kind of pausing development for a year while you go through a lengthy upgrade that requires tons of resources and time. And then by the time you get there, because you're GXP, there's another version coming and you're probably going to go out of support in the next 2 years. And so SaaS allows us to sit on a platform and allow for our vendor to provide us updates on frequent releases. And so we don't need to necessarily concern ourselves with upgrades. But if you're highly configured, it's still going to be painful. And so what we're realizing now is, how do we start to move and make that shift towards out of box so that we're getting the best value we can from our vendors, and partnering with them and sharing, hey, we have this new need for an escalation solution. You guys don't have it out of box. Would this be an opportunity for us to work together, right? Can we build something together? This could be useful to other clients, and sitting on the change boards with our vendors and influencing where possible. So this is where we see the future from a Johnson & Johnson perspective, limiting the number of on-premise instances we have, moving to SaaS, and then really reaping the benefits of what a SaaS solution like ETQ offers. I talked about leveraging opportunities for out of box. And then just be ruthless in your process for throwing out requirements that really only pertain to one group or site. This sub-bullet here is one of my favorites, because I've literally been in conversations where people have said they got a CAPA back in 1982 that said we had to do it this way, and we have to do this for forever moving forward. And those are the hardest conversations to have with your business partners. Stripping away those features, let's say, or offering it a different way is highly uncomfortable. But you have to work through those conversations. I know they're hard, but ideally, if you're going out of box, you're not going to configure it for every single CAPA or observation or health authority inspection that you ever had. You're going to do the best you can from a compliance standpoint and meet the spirit of the regulation. And you can do that many different ways. And so convincing the business to let go of some of those either process inefficiencies or things that we do because of the past, very hard conversation, but very worth it. And be ruthless in those conversations. And again, ensure your steerco is empowered, right? To make those decisions, to support your process, and to help stand up when, which happens in every single project, without a doubt, you will reach a point where the business will push for configuration. It's just the way it is. It's just how it's always been for me. We always get to a point where we need more config. This isn't going to work for us. It has to be our way. And you start to lose sight of the vision that you set up early on around why out of box is so important. And so just ensure your steerco is empowered to keep you on that track and keep and support the team on the right path of the vision that you set early on.
Oh, so thank you, Joe. Super interesting as usual. So for all of you attending, what I hope you got out of this session are some of the operational and business benefits of harmonizing quality and safety management, how you should approach your journey towards harmonization, and how to think about harmonization just in general. And again, the key one of the key takeaways is harmonization is not standardization. And you heard from Joel about some best practices, recommendations, lessons learned on how they approach the harmonization journey. But these are really things that you can apply to any industry. And I think one of the things that I'd like to leave you with is that a harmonization journey is not a one and done. I do like what Joel said about, if you're gonna change a process, probably a good idea to start from scratch. But once you have a harmonized process, you're in a really great place to iterate and adapt that process to your ongoing business change, your ongoing business environment. And again, that's one of the key benefits of harmonization. You can make that change in one place versus having to touch a whole bunch of point solutions. So the return on investment for harmonization, just for that alone, is quite significant. So thank you again for joining us. And with that, we'll entertain some questions.